we're going to go ahead and all right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Daniela Labate Cavelli, and I work at NIAPRS. I'm happy to welcome you all today to our webinar this month, titled The Art and Science of Emotional Intelligence, Facing the Challenge of Managing People and Getting Results. So we're really excited today to have an expert with us, Glenn Karunas. NIAPRS has known Glenn for a little while. We met him back with some other work that some of us have done with him. So we're happy to have him here talking to us today about this great topic. And we think he'll be really engaging, and it's something that you all can use every day. So let's go to the next slide. We'll do a little housekeeping, and then I'll go ahead and introduce Glenn. So as you know, today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to find our recording as well as the slides posted on our website within a few days at www.niaprs.org. We are offering CEs for social workers, CPRPs, LMHCs, and OMH peers. In order to qualify for CEs, we ask that you be in the virtual space with us and not just dialed in on the telephone, and that you return the completed evaluation form that you'll be receiving within 48 hours of receipt. So everyone that's registered for today's webinar will receive an evaluation form via email within 24 hours, and we ask that you fill that out and send it back within 48 hours so that you can get your CEs. We also want to make today's presentation as dynamic as possible. Lots of time at the end today for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box throughout. I'll be monitoring and keeping track of those. And then we'll spend the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar with Glenn going through those questions. All right, let's go to the next slide. So just a little bit about Glenn. He's got over 40 years of HR experience in healthcare organizations in the New York metropolitan area. His areas of expertise include organizational development, leadership, employee engagement, and labor and employee relations. He's held multiple leadership positions, including Vice President of Human Resources of Lenox Hill Hospital, as well as Director of Labor and Employee Relations at Mount Sinai Hospital. He most recently served at the Nassau Queens PPS Director of Organizational Development and was responsible for overseeing district workforce initiatives. I do not envy you, including developing.
It was fun.
Yeah, including developing and coordinating training programs, outreach, and communications. So he's currently providing HR resources management and organizational development consulting and training within his own LLC, Bonus HR Consulting, and he also teaches multiple courses as an adjunct professor at Adelphi University in Garden City, New York, and Nassau Community College. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Glenn Karunas. Again, please feel free to use the chat box and let us know if you have any questions. If you want to sort of make a comment, feel free to do that in the chat box as well. And then we'll spend some time at the end going through some of those questions.
Great. So thanks, Daniela, and hi, everyone. I feel like we're the announcers at a ball game. I'm wearing my Mets jersey, so it's probably appropriate. Anyway, glad to have you here. Thanks for being here. I appreciate NIAPRS reaching out to me and asking me to do this, and hopefully we'll have some fun and learn a few things too. What could be better? So just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to start talking with emotional intelligence about emotions, right? I mean, that makes the most sense. So we're going to talk about that at first, then talk about what EQ is. And you'll see here EQ and EI are kind of terms of art, but they're really interchangeable. Most of the time, when I've been working with EQ, and I've been doing this now for about 25 years, I usually call it EQ, but it's called EI as well. And so whatever you'd like, you can use that particular shorthand. After all, in our field, we love abbreviations, don't we? Anyway, so we're going to talk about what EQ is, EQ in the workplace, go to both the dark side and the bright side of EQ, and then spend a little bit of time talking about how we can improve our own EQ. Just in general, I believe that emotional intelligence is such a key skill to learn and understand to be successful, not only in business, but in your life. And I think if you're familiar with EQ, hopefully this will be a good refresher. If you're not familiar with it, hopefully it'll really pique your interest. And one of the last slides, I have some resources that you can use to read about and understand this a little bit further. So look, emotions at work. We see them, we feel them, we exhibit them all the time. How many times have you thought things like this? Oh, she's a jerk. Uh-oh, I'm in big trouble. OMG, that client just doesn't get it. I'm sure we've all said that a few times. I can't believe I just did that. Oh, and then here's another one that I know we've all felt. Oh no, I can't believe I did that. I'm going to get fired. This sucks, but I can get it done. I love my boss, or the corollary, I can't stand my boss. Yay, I got the promotion. And, communication is important both verbally and non-verbally. So we often see the eye roll, the infamous eye roll, when, something hasn't quite gone the way we'd like it, or we're just like, what? And then last but not least, I know this is kind of a family gathering here, but and then, fill in your own, because even if we necessarily haven't said some of those very charged words at work, I know you've thought them. So my point is, we deal with emotions at work all the time. So what is an emotion? It's a strong feeling deriving from one's circumstances, mood, or particularly relationships with others. I've been in the HR field for, over 40 years, as Daniela has said. And, I used to joke around that, HR would be great if you didn't have to deal with the people, because they're the ones that you have the relationships with. They're the ones you can be an expert in your field, have great skills, but dealing with people is really important. And using and developing your emotional intelligence skills will help you to be successful in establishing and building relationships. So what are emotions? If you're a psychologist or if you're in the field of behavioral health, an emotion is often defined as a complex state of feeling that results in physical and psychological changes that influence thought and behavior, right? So emotions have a subjective piece, a physiological response, and then it translates into some kind of action. So there's some kind of behavioral response, either thought or actually speaking or some kind of actions. In short, your emotions affect everything about us: your thinking, your behavior, and your actions. And, emotions play an important role in how we interact with the world, right? It provides us with data, it provides us with information. Your CFOs and your CEOs, especially, are always saying, I need the data for that. Well, emotions do provide us data about ourselves and others. Emotions prepare us for action. If we're feeling something fairly intensely, it gets up and gets us ready to move. It shapes our behavior. So how we feel shapes how we react, respond, move, interact with others. So emotions translate into those kinds of behaviors. And then ultimately, it helps us, or I'll add, hinders us in our interactions with others. It really helps to get good at what I call reading people, or reading the room. Especially when I was in lots of meetings in my hospital days, I'd walk into a room full of employees, and sometimes there would be a little bit of hostility that I could feel by reading the room, because perhaps management had done something that wasn't fully taking into consideration what some of the employees' needs were. So I got pretty good at reading the room and being able to tailor my interactions towards what I could feel or observe was going on at any particular time. What's the impact? Well, it's pretty significant. You feel something, it influences your attitude, it shapes your behavior. Over time, you develop habits as a result of patterns of behavior that you have over time. And then ultimately in life, that could lead to successful interactions, and in some cases, failed interactions, which hopefully you'll learn from. But we want to try to minimize that as much as we can. So emotions play a huge role in our lives, and particularly in our work lives. So, it's clear from anything you felt, and I just have some examples here, that emotions really do influence your work. We don't walk into work as automatons. As much as we like to believe that we think logically most of the time, we really are driven in many cases by our emotions. They could be positive, like confidence, because you've known you can do something well. Satisfaction, because your boss trusts you. There are times we feel calm, not always, but there are times that we feel actually pretty good and secure that we've got ourselves together and we can get things done. We're very excited when we're launching a new project or when something goes well, or it could be downright joyful when you realize something great has happened, like I got the promotion. Yeah. But you know what? We also get bombarded in many cases by our own self-talk with negative emotions like worry and anxiety. How can I achieve these? How can I get the results my boss is looking for? Frustration, especially. I know personally, I never liked being micromanaged, so that was a real source of frustration for me. Anger. Um, I've known all too many people that let their anger get the best of them, and they've really lost the ability to regulate it. And frankly, it makes them so much less effective when they let that anger show, because it really puts people on the defensive. Dislike. Hey, we all like and dislike people. Sometimes we can hide that better than others, and we get disappointed as well. So look, this is going on. These are just examples. There's lots of different emotions that are constantly going on within us and within us as part of an organization. So wouldn't it be great to be able to manage these, right? So think of an instance at work when you've let your emotions get the better of you. All right, I'll just pause there for a second and think about that, get an image of that. I can tell you one particular one that I had. I remember I was in a meeting with a bunch of employees and union reps, and they were really ganging up on me. I think there was myself and one of my colleagues, and there were about 15 of the union folks. And I remember, they were particularly aggressive, and I remember them saying something, and I just finally was at my breaking point, and I lost my cool, and I said, "Get your fat butts out of this room, out of this office." Only I didn't use the word butts. And immediately, as soon as it came out of my mouth, I regretted it. I felt terrible. I actually wound up calling the main union rep, the VP, actually, apologizing to him. Interestingly enough, because I apologized and was really humble about it, it really made our relationship better. But it was something that immediately out of my mouth, I would have liked to take back. Could I have handled it better? Absolutely, I could have. And maybe you've had similar circumstances yourself um, that you can think of when I mention this. But ultimately, developing your emotional intelligence will help you to use your emotions to work for you and not against you. So, I mean, that's what I begin with, and hopefully over the course of the next hour or so, you're going to get a feel for some of the skills around emotional intelligence, what it is, and how you can use it to be a better performer at work, no matter what it is you're doing. If you're a manager, it will hopefully help you become a better manager, deal better with your staff. If you're a staff member, I think it can help you be better with your clients, with your customers, and with your bosses and with some of the higher ups. So we're going to talk about EQ uh, first, just generally defining terms, and then afterwards we're going to talk a little bit about how they can best be used at work. Okay, Glenn. So you've talked about EQ, you've talked about emotions, you've talked about some of these negative impulses and positive ones that we've all had. You've talked about your own experience with, some of the union reps who I know can be frustrating. So tell us, what the heck is emotional intelligence? Well, glad you asked, because the next slide has a lot of information that'll be helpful to you. So um, the primary person whose models I use is a guy named Dan Goleman, Goleman. He didn't invent or initially characterize emotional intelligence, but he really popularized it. He was the first one, and he's a Harvard professor. He was the first one to really have it go into the public discourse and write about it in, frankly, a more practical way. So Goleman says there are 4 boxes, or as I like to use Goleman's techniques and skills, there are 5 boxes. And it's a combination of both personal competence and social competence. So on the personal competence side, we start with self-awareness. And that's the ability to really look at yourself, understand your emotional self, understand your drives and motivations, as well as how they impact others. Coupled with that is self-management, or the ability to control. And I don't always like to use the word control. I look at it more as harnessing or regulating your behavior, because you're going to have feelings. They go through, they float, they come and go. It's your ability to harness them and regulate them, especially away from disruptive impulses, foul moods, and, our propensity to judge people, and really to just take a step back, think before acting, and be able to regulate your emotions so they work for you and not against you. So part of the boxes are managing ourselves, and then we have handling relationships. So we have the social competence, social awareness. A lot of it is empathy and the understand the emotional makeup of other people and treating people according to where they're coming from and how they're feeling at that particular moment. If you take those 3 elements and really start to hone them in their best way, you will look to develop good social skills. And that's the last box. And that's how we manage our relationships, how we manage interactions with people, how we build our networks, how we resolve conflict, and how we try to find common ground and build rapport with others. Okay, that really is the essence of emotional intelligence, of EQ. And I like to break them down into 5 boxes. I like to call them self-awareness, self-regulation or self-control, motivation, both of yourself and others, empathy, and social skills. So it's a little different. The motivational box kind of crosses between self-awareness and social awareness, but certainly just this construct works in a fairly simple level to get you to understand what the elements of EQ are. And I'll go into some of them in a little bit more detail. But I always like to define my terms. Okay, so emotional intelligence is, according to some experts, number 1, your ability to acquire and apply knowledge of your emotions and the emotions of others, right? So at the core of emotional intelligence is understanding and managing emotions. Number 2, quite simply, the intelligent use of your emotions, intentionally making your emotions work for you to help guide your thinking and behavior in ways that enhance your results. And I always like that definition because, look, when we're doing anything at work, you can be the nicest person in the world. And I've known many, many nice people at work. The key is whether or not those people can nicely get results. So EQ is about intelligently using your emotions in order to have a greater chance of getting the results that your organization is looking for. And lastly, the ability to tune into your emotions and others. And as a result of being knowledgeable and understanding that, translating those into action. And that's from Pew in 2007. Okay. So, interestingly enough, one of the first proponents of emotional intelligence was a guy whose last name is Baron Cohen. Interestingly enough, he is the brother of Sacha Baron Cohen, who from Borat fame, but and he actually has something called the trait model of emotional intelligence, of which there are about 34 different traits. And if you want to look at it, you can certainly explore that a little further. I tend to use Goleman's version because I think it's much simpler and easier to understand and apply. All right, so some of you I know are a little skeptical. You want numbers, okay? Glenn's got numbers for you. 90% of high performers, according to Dr. Travis Bradbury, who, along with Dr. Jane Greaves, wrote EI 2.0, well-known researchers in the field of EQ. He has found that 90% of top performers have been found to have high emotional intelligence. EQ is responsible for 58% of your job performance. So whether it's good or not so good, it's going to be better than half your performance. And ultimately, people with high EQ have been shown to make $29,000 more annually than their low EQ counterparts. Now, I think these numbers came from a 2016 or 2017 study. So, put a little inflation on top of that. It's probably closer to 33 or 34,000. I don't know about any of you out there, but I could certainly use an extra 30 grand in my pocket. So it behooves you to work on your emotional intelligence. It can be dealt with. It can be improved, because, if no other reason, if results aren't enough, you can have more money in your pocket by being more emotionally intelligent. Even the World Economic Forum, which actually now I just actually looked at some outlook from them for 2025. They just updated it, but I didn't have time to get it in the slide. But anyway, you can see emotional intelligence is among the top skills that are growing according to the World Economic Forum, meaning that these are skills that in the future people will need in order to be more successful in business, in the economic stratosphere. So important to know about EQ, understand it, and try to apply it as best you can. So you've gotten a little bit of an overview. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. You got the 50,000 foot view. Now I'm going to drop it down to about 10,000 feet, so you understand this a little bit better. So what are the core EI competencies? You've got self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Those are the 5 core competencies, okay? So, and they're called a lot of different things: relationship management or social awareness, self-performance, but the basics are the same. So self-awareness is observing yourself, recognizing feelings when they happen, understanding and accurately perceiving your emotions as you interact with others. In other words, knowing how you come across, knowing how you feel and being able to identify that. And number 2, knowing how you come across. How many of you have seen people, and frankly, you might have even done it yourself, where you lose control of your emotions, you start yelling at somebody, and you see the reaction. They get defensive, they withdraw. I would submit to you that it's not a very effective way to try to get a point across. So it's understanding that, it's being aware when that happens, and staying aware of your emotions in the moment, and not only in the moment, but your tendency across situations. So are there circumstances when, for example, you have to deliver a presentation and you get really anxious, and certain feelings come up that don't allow you to really let the information flow in the best way it can? Or you're in a confrontation with somebody in particular who you don't like, and you feel intimidated by them. So you get to see some of those tendencies over situations, identify them, and be able to much better deal with them by understanding yourself and how you're reacting in those circumstances. I would submit to you that the key building block, and actually when I do my management class in the Adelphi MBA program. So just think, this is sort of like getting an MBA by taking this class. I asked them, what do you think is the most important of all the elements of EQ? And inevitably, the number one thing is self-awareness, usually followed closely behind by social awareness. But to me, knowing oneself is a key to just about everything. So the key building block is self-awareness. So you have to ask yourself things like, what's important to me? How do I experience certain situations? What do I want and how do I feel? And is there a congruency between what I want, how I feel, and how I'm acting? Or am I sabotaging myself by feeling a certain way and coming across in a way that I really don't want to come across because I'm not being as effective as I could be? What drives me? Hey, always looking at the pros and cons, right? What do I do well? What do I not do so well? What can I enhance with what I do well? And how can I improve on my challenges? I don't like to call them negatives. I like to call them challenges because challenges can be overcome. And what can I work on? What can I do to improve all those things? So looking yourself in the mirror, finding out about yourself, just being, almost what I call pulling the camera back and observing yourself and seeing, how do I react? How do I feel? And how can I do better? Okay. So really self-awareness is to me, the fundamental building block. Whether it's the most important or not, I'm not sure, but it certainly is, the piece that you really have to become very, very comfortable and familiar with. Then we move on to self-management. So you felt something, right? And so you need to be able to manage, control, harness your emotions. I knew somebody that I worked with very closely who was a fellow VP of mine, and I'll call him Gary for purposes of this discussion. And Gary would often, he had an anger management problem, quite frankly, and he would often get really angry and frustrated at his staff. And as the HR person, I'd have people come to me and complain about Gary and said, look, hey, he's a really bright guy. He gets all this stuff, but the way he translates it just isn't working because people really get turned off. They get negative. They get defensive. He's not being as effective. Is there something that, you can work with him and help him with? So, I worked with Gary. One of the things that I, interesting enough, told him was a technique that I'd like to use. And here we get even lower than 5,000 feet. But I used to like to tell people, look, when you're in a meeting or you're talking to somebody, deliberately just put your finger over your mouth. It's almost like you're thinking and nobody will know any different. But if you put your finger over your mouth, you have to do something in order to be able to talk. You have to move that finger. And in the time it takes you to move that finger, you can think about what it is that you want to say, what it is you're feeling, and how do you want to react. And just that brief, you know, pause might give you an opportunity to harness what your feeling is and come across with a much better type of communication than just having your anger blurt out. He came back to me about 3 weeks later and said, Glenn, you know what? I tried that. It really helped, to put the finger there. So, thank you. I really appreciate it. So I really helped him. And then frankly, he went on to become a COO at another organization. So I guess he was able to manage some of his tendencies pretty well. It's the ability to use your emotional awareness and stay flexible in your reactions. So I do a lot of teaching on leadership and management and different styles. And people that have better self-control tend to be able to tailor their style to the people, to the situation, and to a place that they get much more comfortable in. And finding ways to handle some of the more negative stuff like anger, anxiety, fear, sadness. So being able to manage that, just taking the pause, taking a moment to realize how you come across will influence your success is often all you need to be able to bring some of these things under a little better control. Motivation, and I use motivation in two different ways. Um, uh, when Goleman talks about it, he really talks more about self-motivation. To me, motivation is two pieces. Number one, it's understanding yourself and your own motivations, what your passions are, what you're driven by. It's being able to, along with your self-regulation, being able to delay some of the gratification and impulses by understanding there's a bigger picture out there. But it's also the ability to identify and understand what motivates others. It's often been difficult for me in my career because I felt I've always been so self-motivated. It's sometimes difficult for me to identify what motivates others. And, way back when I used to say, oh my gosh, this motivates me. Why doesn't it motivate them? Well, the answer is people have different motivations. So being able to understand motivation and what it's about and identify it both in yourself and in others will help you go a long way towards bridging differences and having good social skills. Empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, really taking that step to understand others, understand people as individuals, understand where they come from, understand their background, appreciating that they may have different experiences than you do, and they experience the world in a different place. I mean, just think about it. When you're a manager, you're able to direct. But when you're a staff member, you may not have the ability to direct. You're under the direction of others. Think about that from a perspective and how things are coming across and whether or not they're truly understood, or whether or not people can actually do things when they're in a staff position that you may not, that you may be able to do as a manager because of your authority, but they can't. So appreciate how they feel when you've given them a task and they may not necessarily have the ability, skill, or resources to do it. So it's putting yourself in other people's shoes to understand where they're coming from and then be able to respond appropriately. And then lastly, it's that social skill, relationship management, the ability to use your emotional awareness to direct and manage interactions with others so that you develop solid and helpful relationships. I don't know about you, but most of the time, in all the years I've been doing this, and human resources sort of has a unique position in that we tend to see the entire organization in a much broader perspective. We get to know the people, how they interact with different departments, um, and what I found is that, it's not so much the formal structure or infrastructure or the policies that help you get things done. It's the relationships that you have with people that'll really allow you to get things done, be effective, and get the results that you need. So being able to understand yourself, regulate your emotions, have empathy, understand yours and others' motivations. If you pull those all together and develop some skills in that area and be able to set really a positive tone for cooperation, you will have developed social skills that'll help you to develop those relationships, resolve conflict, be able to work with people no matter what style they have, because you have a flexible style, and ultimately be able to get the results that your organization is expecting, right? So, you've got the pieces, and I've tried to give you an overview of them. So you've got the self-awareness, knowing oneself, self-regulation, understanding the emotions, how you react in certain situations, um, what you're feeling, and how those get translated into actions, and how you can regulate that to be effective. Motivation, what drives you? How passionate are you? And then also look at the motivation of others, which, frankly, you only get through the use of empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and being able to figure out where they're coming from. And a lot of, when I teach diversity and implicit bias and inclusion, I talk a lot about empathy and understanding that people have different lifestyles. They come from different cultures. They've been exposed to different cultures. They have different backgrounds. They have different life experiences than you do. It's really important to empathize, understand, get from other people. If you don't know, ask, observe, and to really be empathetic to where other people are coming from. If you can do that, if you can pull those things together, start to work on your social skills. I taught a class about this yesterday as well. And we talked about, hey, even things like making small talk, putting people at ease, being open, being able to go in and assess a situation or read the room pretty quickly. And then because you understand yourself, you're in a much better position to understand others and translate that into behaviors that build relationships and ultimately get results. So, we've talked about the foundation, which are these 5 elements. Now let's see how we can apply them to the workplace. All right. So I talked before about um, emotions as data, right? So who better than the people from the Wharton Business School to really focus on emotions as workplace data, right? So Dr. Barsdale, who teaches at Wharton, said the idea behind emotional intelligence in the workplace is that it's a skill through which employees treat emotions as valuable data in navigating a situation. Okay. So when you're feeling something, or when you're feeling something in others, that's information, that's data. And it's really important to develop the skills to not ignore it, or not to get so caught up in it that you just react to it. But it's more responding. It's more about having a choice rather than just impulsively reacting to a circumstance because you're feeling a certain thing. So again, it's being aware and being able to regulate yourself, then translating that into relationship building with others using an understanding of emotion, using empathy, and using social skills to get things done. So, I'm trying as much as I can to help you connect the dots to these pieces in a very practical way to show you that these are really important skills in the modern workplace. And it would, I think, do everybody well to not only get this um, workshop today, but to also look further into this. When I initially learned about this in the early 90s, I was so intrigued by it that I just started reading a whole bunch of things on it. Now, whenever I see, especially when it comes up in popular literature, like a magazine or some kind of blog post, it's like, oh wow, people are now understanding and appreciating how important emotional intelligence is. I figured it out pretty quickly, and I've tried to use it to be successful in my career, and now I'm really passionate, as you might be able to tell, about passing that information on to others, so they can help themselves and be more effective in their workplaces as well. So look, lots of different research has been done on emotional intelligence. Um, so here's why it really matters. People with high EQ, in addition to making 30 grand more than the people who do not have high EQ, tend to make better decisions, tend to be better at problem solving, tend to be able to understand and manage conflicts. And I do a lot of work, especially when I do team building, on understanding and managing conflict, the different methods by which conflicts can be resolved. People with high EQ tend to really get that and inherently understand it better than people who don't. They have greater empathy. They tend to listen better. And my gosh, I've done so much on how important communication is. And, I really try to get the point across that listening is critical. When you're communicating, listening is far more important than talking. So, because that's how you really get information that you can utilize to be effective, both emotionally and rationally. Um, People who have high EQ tend to be more passionate, and therefore they're not absent as much. They tend to be better at reflecting and taking things in and not reacting immediately. They're better able to handle constructive feedback. Some call it constructive criticism. I don't like to call it that because it's inherently negative, but constructive feedback. So when you're doing, actually in yesterday's class, we were talking a lot about using your EQ in performance evaluations, because you usually have some good information for people, but then you have some information that they don't necessarily want to hear. So figuring out how to present that in the best way, and being able to also read and listen to the person who you're providing it to try to make it literally as constructive as you possibly can. So you're looking to positively change behavior rather than people getting defensive and saying, I don't do that. That's not me. You're not really understanding how I come across. So, people with high EQ and learning some of the skills can be much better at doing a performance evaluation as well. They have greater responsibility then to perform better, and frankly, they're happier in their jobs. However, the other side of the coin is people with low EQ love to play the victim, tend not to take responsibility and blame others. They tend to have poor emotional control, and I'm sure we've all met people who um, are lose their temper, who exhibit their anxiety pretty easily, who get very frustrated and show that to everybody. When you look at them, if you think about it, you probably I don't want to say lose respect, but you probably um, find them to be less effective because they're not good at regulating it. Now, I'm not saying you bottle them. That is not what I'm espousing here. What I'm saying is that because, if you bottle your emotions for too long, they tend to come out in a really negative fashion. What I'm saying is you understand what they are and you channel them into a much more positive response. Whether that means, I know I'm getting angry, I'm going to keep my mouth shut right now, or um, you know what, I'm getting frustrated. Let me think about a way to exit myself from this situation so the frustration doesn't blow over. Or um, you know what, I'm feeling something here that I'm losing a little bit of control. Let me take a breath. Let me um, express something in a fairly neutral way and keep the conversation going so I don't just blow right now. People low EQ don't listen well, tend to be critical because I find they get a little self, um, selfish as opposed to selfless. And they tend to be critical of others and blame others. They're not usually open to other people's opinion, and they tend to be self-absorbed, right? So you may have an image in your mind of people who you think might have high EQ or have low EQ, or you've looked at yourself and said, you know what? Hey, just like me, I've been in both of these situations, depending upon the circumstance. I prefer to be on the left side more than on the right side. So, I've really worked hard at trying to hone some of those EQ skills. So here's the man. Here's Goldman. Great stuff. Harvard Business Review does a lot of work with Goldman. Does a lot of work with emotional intelligence. There's really if you were to read nothing else about emotional intelligence, Goldman put out a terrific article in 2004 called "What Makes a Leader." Really a great overview of emotional intelligence in only about 10 or 12 pages. You'll probably read that like me. That's how I started with this. And then I started reading other stuff too, because I was so interested. Anyway, it again, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. What are the hallmarks of those? We've defined them already. What are the hallmarks? People who are self-aware tend to be more self-confident. They have a realistic self-assessment, and they tend to have sort of a self-deprecating sense of humor. People who are good at regulating their emotions tend to come off as more trustworthy and have integrity. They feel more comfortable with ambiguity. And my gosh, I'm sure you've seen lots of circumstances that are very ambiguous in the work that you do. And there are people who have difficulty with their emotions who are not comfortable with ambiguity. To be successful in an organization, there's a lot of ambiguity. It's best to be able to be comfortable with it. And if you work on some of that self-regulation, you too can get there. And people who are open to change, people, have different views of change. I do a lot of change management work. The key is being open to it, communicating it well, and having a game plan. Motivation, people who are motivated have a strong drive to achieve. They tend to be optimistic. That is so important, and I'll go into that in a little bit. And they tend to be more committed to their organizations because they're kind of fired up to do the work that they love to do. People are who are empathetic, as I said before, in the field of diversity, they have much more cross-cultural sensitivity. They tend to be uh, much more understanding and therefore can provide better service to their clients and their customers. And lastly, when people have good social skills, they're good at leading change. They tend to be very persuasive and influential, which is so critical to getting things done that you need to get done, and certainly advancing your agenda. And then they're really better at working in teams because they understand the interrelationships and how to be effective in working with people. So let's start off with the personal competence side, all right? The self-management piece, self-awareness and self-regulation, right? So let's start off with the self-awareness, looking at yourself. And I don't mean necessarily a Zen-like state, although you can get in that if that'll help you. But it's really looking at yourself in the mirror, recognizing your moods, emotions, and drives, and not only the effect they have on you, but when you translate that into behavior, what the effect it is that they have on others. It's knowing yourself. It's knowing how you impact others. That tends to be characterized by people who are thoughtful, people who are comfortable with, ambiguity. You tend to, when you know yourself, you tend to be a little bit more self-confident because you understand how you come across, right? You also have a realistic self-assessment. You don't think you're great at everything. I'm sure nobody is. I'm not, but I know what I do well, and I know what I don't do as well. And then, frankly, that's the essence of team building, is you try to get people on your team that, fill in gaps and do a lot of things well. And then, having a self-deprecating sense of humor, having a good deal of humility, is, it tends to characterize people who are self-aware. Lots of people have made quotes, but I figured, let me go back to almost the very beginning and talking about wise people such as Aristotle, who said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. I could have had Yoda here, who is another tremendous philosopher. But I decided to stick with Aristotle, and people would get it. But knowing yourself is really the beginning of everything. So it's really important to understand yourself before you do anything else. As I said before, it's a building block for all of EQ. So what are some ways to help your self-awareness? Ask for feedback, especially from trusted colleagues. Know your strengths and weaknesses, or as I like to call them, challenges. Self-reflect, okay? Take time, sit back. I used to like to do it when I would drive from work. I tended to have a long commute in just about every place I've ever worked. So I would sit back and I'd say, what did I do well? What could I have done better? How did this go? How could I handle it better next time? Monitor your self-talk. Over the last several years, as I've looked more into um, things like emotional intelligence and organizational development, I realize how important self-talk is, and how you can really talk yourself into something or talk yourself out of something. And, we're constantly bombarded by our own self-talk within our heads. Some of the studies, unfortunately, say that more of that self-talk tends to be negative rather than positive. So you really need to be able to keep it as positive, psych yourself up, knowing your self-worth, knowing your awareness, knowing the things that you do well, and keep it on a much more optimistic level, as opposed to, that negative self-talk, which will kind of bring you down. Practice saying no. Hey, folks, we can't be super people. We can't do everything. When you know you're at your limit, you have to be willing to say no in an effective way. Not just, no, I'm not doing it, but, I have several other things that are on my plate. I really can't get to that now. Can we figure out a time when I can do this, when it works for both of us? And then, constantly questioning your decisions. And I don't mean question in a negative standpoint. Just look in the mirror, see when you've made good decisions, see when you made not so good decisions, recognizing how you felt when you made those good decisions, and try to reproduce that as much as possible. Okay, so, then you've got self-regulation, putting it under that big umbrella of some willpower, some executive function, um, self-control, self-management, whatever you want to call it. It really is the ability to control, manage, harness, redirect disruptive impulses and moods. I mean, we all have them. We know that emotions flow through us. We all know we're judging all the time. And I find myself saying, when I get into that mindset, when I get into that self-talk, I find myself having to pull back and say, you know what? Don't judge. You're getting very judgmental now. Don't judge. Try to remain open to different points of view, different ideas. And really, it's to melt it down to its basis form, it's to think before acting. So whether it's putting your finger over your mouth, or whether it's taking a breath, taking a pause, taking a little mental break, it's really taking that time to understand how it is you're feeling, and then to translate that into positive action. It's characterized by people who reflect, who are flexible, who have a measured response. I I used to try to go, that's interesting. Let me give that some thought, because I may have thought it was a stupid idea. I might thought it was a great idea. but I didn't want to give it away at that particular time. I wanted to go back, reflect on it, think about it a little bit more. So my response was measured, right? And that was one of the techniques that I used to make sure that I would regulate myself, to give myself a chance to really think through the pros and cons of whatever it was, and then to come out in a way that was going to be positive as opposed to, negative for myself and others. You know, one of the things that you have to be mindful of is the emotional hijack. All right. Those are situations we've all been in, right? Where somebody does something that triggers us and we just impulsively react as opposed to responding, right? So you really need to know what your triggers are, right? You know, challenge yourself in those situations. Say, you know, what's causing the feelings? What, you know, what are you telling yourself? Why am I reacting this way? Do I have time to think this through, or can I take a pause? What's this other person's goal in pressing my buttons, right? And then getting to a situation where, you can choose your response as opposed to impulsively reacting. You can choose your response. So it's just taking that moment to make sure that people aren't pressing your buttons. In fact, there's a school of thought that says that when you find yourself in situations that happen time and time again, where your buttons are going to get pushed, if you have a stock response that that is your go-to response when you're being emotionally hijacked, that helps. So it's almost like planning in advance for that you're going to have a certain phrase or a certain approach when somebody's trying to emotionally hijack you, that how you're going to respond, and that helps. Okay. Um, so some people use different techniques. I'll get back to you on that. You know what? I really have to think through this before I can respond. Whatever it is, you have your go-to response rather than just reacting in a way that might be negative. Okay, motivation. Very mysterious. You could be the mouse trying to get the cheese, who is very uses a lot of ingenuity and puts on the helmet. All right, but motivation is about that persistence, about not giving up. So technically, it's motivation is intensity, direction, and persistence. With persistence being a key thing, that stick-to-itiveness, and then the intensity. How passionate are you, and how hard are you going to try to get this stuff done? One of the definitions I love of motivation is a passion to work for reasons that go beyond money and status, right? So we all have our passions. We've all gone into what we do to try to help others. What is that passion? Is it challenge? Is it the purpose of this organization? Is it a happy family both at work and home? Is it looking for new challenges? What is my passion? And once you figure that out, you'll have a strong drive to achieve. You'll feel more optimistic and enthusiastic. You're always pushing yourself to get better. I know that's something that always pushes me. There's something personally that you want to do is really developing that fire from within, as I like to call it. There's a guy named Bob Nelson who does lots of different work with motivation. And he talks about building a fire from within rather than a fire underneath. And then people who are motivated tend to be much more resilient because they can bounce back from adversity. So just a little word on resilience. It's the capacity for being flexible. We've heard a lot during the pandemic about being resilient and how important it is, be able to bounce back, to adjust to difficult circumstances, to having mental toughness. And people who are resilient, and EQ is one of the foundations of resilience, tend to be more optimistic, have a positive attitude, can regulate their emotions, and have the ability to see failure as a form of helpful feedback, right? And haven't we talked about that? Self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, social skill, okay? So being able to be resilient, being able to understand where you are, maintain a positive outlook. I know things are going to get better, is an important piece of resilience and people with higher EQ tend to be more resilient. Resilience and EQ, it's kind of a combination of coping, grit, EQ, and having good sense. So, people who have EQ tend to have better coping skills. And in order to develop resilience, look what you do. Learn what restores you and depletes you. And that's self-awareness. Use positive and realistic self-talk. That's about self-regulation. And mindfully manage the conditions and behaviors that impact the things that either restore you or deplete you. And that's all about understanding yourself, being aware, being able to regulate yourself, being able to manage your emotions in a way that works for you. That is really the hallmark of people who are resilient. So, I do a lot of work on workplace burnout. I talk a lot about resilience there, but I wanted to just touch upon it today because I think it really works hand in hand. High EQ tends to be present in those who can really exercise resilience. And don't we need that these days, certainly more than ever. So how can you stay motivated? I tend to believe that motivation is internal. I've read a lot of stuff on motivation because it's always been sort of a mystery to me how to motivate others, but it really is internal. So you have to figure out how you can spark the motivation in others. But remember what motivates you, challenge yourself daily. We've learned during the pandemic that motion creates emotion. So kind of get up, move around, don't stay stuck behind your computer. Something that I love to do, and that is to keep learning. That's a way to stay motivated. Really, it feeds your brain and it feeds your soul. Hang out with people who are terrific, and then you'll want to aspire to them. I'm a golfer. I have a friend who is literally a scratch golfer, and when I play with him, it really inspires me to be a better golfer. So I try to hang out with superstars of golf and superstars of other things as well. And you know what? You've got to be willing to reward yourself, reward others, reward yourself. Take a little break, have that double ice cream sundae when you've done something well, because that's a way to stay motivated and to keep on going. And then motivating others. Look, communication is a key, understanding people, allowing your staff to participate in the decision making, being a coach and a mentor to people, allowing them the parameters to do their job so they can be creative. And then again, that recognition and reward for their efforts, that will hopefully keep others, at least give you a window into other people's motivation. All right, so now let's, that's the side for personal competence. Again, I look at motivation as straddling the both of them, but let's look at social competence as well. So empathy, right? It's the ability to understand other people and the skill in treating them according to where they're coming from. So again, knowing their background, knowing their trends, knowing how they react, okay? And then also, understanding that it's not about you. It's about the people you're leading. It's about the people you're working with. It's really more putting yourself into their shoes and understanding where they're coming from in order to be effective and then have good interaction. So that tends to be characterized by compassion, humility, working together and collaborating, understanding where you are through that self-awareness and self-regulation, and then understanding where people are coming from through understanding their motivation and empathizing, and then using the skills to socially collaborate with them so you can really get things done together. It goes to the heart of cultural competency. When you have empathy, you tend to develop more of that humility and that self-deprecating sense of humor. How can you create a more empathetic workplace? Be excited, be supportive, get to know your employees as people, a little bit more than they do this or they do that for your clients. Get to know who they are, their families, their individuals, their personalities. Be flexible. All right. Don't just say there's only one way to do it. Be allowed to get results within parameters in a flexible way. You know, um, Obviously, your organizations may offer the benefits they offer, but look, you have to make sure that you're offering things that people want to come for, and they may not be monetary. It may be, just the environment that you've created is a tremendous benefit to your employees. Acknowledge and appreciate what they're doing. Care. I talk about a lot about leadership and management. And one thing I do emphasize, because I don't think enough of the literature does, is you need to care about people, right? One of the key things, I've done lots of work on employee engagement, but one of the key things people want, staff want, is to be cared about, knowing you care about them as people, to make them better, to do their work well, to help them learn and grow, right? And then, demonstrate that you understand, and then frankly, do a lot more listening than talking, right? What do they say? God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in proportion. This will go a long way. If you can do some of these things, start doing them better, you can then, tend to be able to show much more empathy towards your employees. Last but not least, social skill, you know, it's that proficiency in managing relationships and building networks. It's the ability to find common ground. I spent a considerable amount of time in doing labor relations. That was, the initial thing. I've negotiated scores of collective bargaining agreements, first actually on the union side, then for most of my career on the management side. One of the things that I really knew was I had to use a lot of skill to think win-win, to deal with a lot of conflict, to look for common ground, to build rapport, to build ways to an agreement, to throw out ideas, to try to be collaborative, to try to be empathetic and look at what other people were looking for or looking at, and then to try to communicate it in a way that was acknowledge their position, but also try to communicate, hey, but we have these restrictions. So let's try to find a way that we can meet your needs, but at the same time take into consideration what our limitations are. All right. And then basically to just try to interactively interact effectively with other people. If you can really get to know others, understand them, know what makes them tick, understand yourself, you, my friends, will tend to be more persuasive. And what's greater when you're, in a position of leadership where you can be persuasive, you can be influential, whether it's to your staff, whether it's to your clients, being able to understanding my own inner workings, understanding where you're coming from, taking that information and being able to craft together an argument that is persuasive, taking into consideration what I need and what you need. When you stop and take the time to do that, you will be more persuasive. You will get more cooperation. You will operate better in a team. You will recognize the importance of transparent communication. You will see the thrill, as I have certainly later in my career, about really what it's all about is helping others. You'll be able to manage conflict better. And, change is inevitable. If you can get those points across, be persuasive, communicate, when there's a change coming down the road, you will have greater influence among your staff to be able to make that change more effectively than if you really didn't have these kind of skills. So look, social skills in the workplace, it's not only about what you say, it's about the nonverbal stuff too. It's about mastering the art of negotiation. There are a lot of different ways to do it. It's about being persuasive and influential. It's about having critical thinking skills, which to me goes a lot to empathy, understanding where other people are coming from. That's the way you can do the best problem solving. Think win-win. Being able to have the fortitude to have enough data and information to make decisions and not constantly look for more. Sometimes, in my view, you've got to call the question and make decisions with the most and the best information you've got. Being assertive and not aggressive, and working well together with your teammates. To improve your social skills, a couple of key things here. I've got 11 keys, but you've got to work on your own attitude, and that goes to self-awareness and self-regulation. You've got to watch your body language because people are reading you all the time. It's much better to be open rather than closed. Obviously to listen, but one really important thing on this list is number 7, avoiding those fire starters, hot words, being over dramatic, trying to induce guilt, blaming people, There are certain words, especially in society now, that will antagonize people. Avoid them. They are not good for developing relationships. Okay. And being reflective and constantly, um, looking at yourself, being self-reflective is really important. Look at yourself in situations, see how things went well if you've handled things in a certain way, maybe not so well in other ways, and look to constantly improve. So, I told you I was a Star Wars fan. You got to beware of the dark side, right? And, there's Darth Vader. If you only knew the power of the dark side, because you know what? People are looking to manipulate you all the time. So when you have higher EQ, you can usually pick that up. When you're feeling fearful, you can identify that people may be trying to do that to you. When you're angry, this is the technique I was talking about before. It's called green lighting, and that is having a pre-established plan when you know somebody is looking to trigger you. So you can get out of it in a way that's preserves your dignity and your integrity, preserves the integrity of the person you're dealing with, and not get yourself sucked into, overreacting. If you get overexcited, thinking, hey, is this too good to be true? Sometimes people deliberately confuse you. You might have noticed that and try to obfuscate things. You have to make sure you slow down and clarify it. Sometimes people ask you for something and you do it, and then they ask you for something bigger, or you've asked somebody to do something, it's not that big, then they ask you for something bigger. Make sure there's some reciprocity in that. And, once you know yourself and can ask yourself and understand your drives and passions, you can be better at dealing with peer pressure, because if you anything that somebody's trying to make you do or manipulate you into, ask yourself, does this really conform to my values? And if it does, okay. But if it doesn't, you can better resist that peer pressure. All right. Look, there are certain types that we know are very manipulative, like a narcissist, for example, right? They tend to be bullies. They tend to be overly aggressive. Look, when dealing with a narcissist, you've got to set healthy boundaries. You've got to take the focus off them because they love the attention. Also, the other thing that I've done is sometimes if I know narcissists, they love the attention. So I play it up. I put the focus on them, but I don't let them hijack or completely take the circumstances. Okay. Don't be too aggressive because they'll just bully you right back. Usually with a narcissist, I've learned it's not about you, it's about them. So try not to take things personally. That's the self regulation and self control that we talk about. Suck up when necessary for the short term, just to live another day. Look for other people to validate or support you. And look, if it gets too bad, just move on. You don't have to stay there. Other types of people who you can learn with good EQ to deal with are people who are passive aggressive, right? I've known lots of them. All right. The signs are they're sarcastic, they procrastinate, they sulk, they deliberately underperform, right? And they can make you angry and frustrated. But again, if you keep that anger in check, you redirect the behavior back on them. What do you think? Don't get into a win-lose struggle with them because they're going to just drag you down. Try to be collaborative and try to put it back on them because they're trying to usually offload something on you. Um, Sometimes you can laugh about it and say, "Oh, come on, I know you're better than that," and that'll diffuse that passive aggressive side. You know, send the problem back to them to solve. And again, just like with a narcissist, sometimes if you're dealing with a passive aggressive person, or they're really pushing your buttons, sometimes you have to call the question and say, you know what, this isn't for me. I've got to be willing to move on. However, so that's the dark side. On the bright side, look how important it is when you can develop the good EQ. The power of influence is in knowing yourself. you know it's knowing yourself so you can work really well with others. What are some of the key? I look a lot at the blogs for Center for Creative Leadership. They say 4 keys to influence are, understanding politics in your organization, so having political savvy, doing just enough self-promotion in sort of a humble way to make sure that people know who you are and what you're good at, building trust through empathy, through working with people through getting to know them and leveraging the networks that you have, those relationships that you've been able to build, that will really give you a lot of influence. And then working with people, understand where they're coming from. So use empathy, stir their emotions with stories. There's a lot in the literature right now about how important storytelling is, to getting your points across and to being influential. When you're passionate about something, people pick that up, um, looking to build rapport. And then ultimately the key to, relationships is engendering trust. And that's only earned. That doesn't come right away. So, how do you do trust? You be genuine, you're authentic, you're humble, you're honest, you're viewed as dependable, you're sincere, you actually listen to people, you ask questions to make sure you understand it. You say thank you a lot. You're present when people are talking to you. I was talking to somebody yesterday in the class I was given, and they told me, whenever I would, be talking to a particular employee, they'd be pulling out their phone and looking at it. And, finally I had to call them on it and say, you're not listening to what I'm saying. So, it's being present and being there for people. That will go a long way towards, establishing those relationships that are so important to getting things done. So, just a quick overview. We've talked about it here a little bit on improving your EQ, how you're going to go about doing, asking the question about self-awareness. What am I feeling right now? What are the people feeling? What can I do to control and regulate my emotions? How can I show genuine interest in others? And, what's driving me? How passionate am I about getting this across? So, these are questions you may want to ask yourselves. You know, do I show these kind of signs? Am I critical? Am I pointing fingers? Am I overly anxious? Am I making excuses? If you don't do these things, you tend to have higher EQ. The fact that you're open-minded and not critical, and you're willing to listen to other points of view. The fact that you are a good listener, that you don't sugarcoat the truth. And I don't mean just blurting things out, but being transparent, being honest with people. Don't BS people, with things that are important for them to know. And then, lastly, when you're wrong, as I did with the example I gave you earlier, apologize. That will go a long way towards establishing better rapport and ultimately trust. It went a long way with me and this particular person. So it's important that you do that. However, what's the corollary? Low emotional intelligence. If you're argumentative, if you're somebody who doesn't listen, if you look to constantly point fingers and blame others, and if you're constantly emotionally outbursting, whether it's anger, excitement, thrills, frustration, those tend to be signs of low emotional intelligence. So, you want to try to get into the previous slide and stay away with what you can from this slide. Okay, rounding the home stretch. And I'm not going to go through each of these items, but I'm going to try to point out some of the key things. And, I know you'll be able to access this presentation afterwards to improve your EQ. So let's look at self-awareness. All right. Pay attention to how you're feeling. Take stock in your emotional strengths and weaknesses. When do I get angry? When do I get excited? What are circumstances that I feel good or not so good? And let's try to emphasize the more positive, the more optimistic piece. Know what your hot buttons are and know when people are pushing them. All right. And also remember, it's important to know that emotions flow and are fleeting. They're not permanent. So, reacting in the moment might not be the best thing. Hold off, wait till that emotion passes, wait till you understand it better, and you can respond better. All right. Self-regulation. Two things I'd like you to take away from this slide. Number one, keep your cool, especially when you're dealing with your boss. I had a situation where I was addressing at a department head meeting a group of about 60 managers, and my boss was in the front row, and she literally started berating me for something that happened. My initial emotional reaction was, you're really being unfair. I can't believe you're dressing me down in front of people. You don't know all the circumstances. You don't know the full story. That's what my head was saying. what, what I was doing inside was saying, you know what? If I argue with her in front of all these people, I lose. So just keep my cool. I looked back at my stock. I was greenlining, saying, okay, we've got it under control. No problem. We will fix it. I will have something to you by tomorrow, which is a solution to this problem. I can't tell you how many people came up to me afterwards saying, wow, you handled that so well. She was wrong. And frankly, she called me the next day and said, you know what? I was wrong. I lost my cool. I'm really sorry to put you in that situation. And I said, don't worry, we will fix it. So, keeping your cool, especially with your boss, is really critical. You don't win if you overreact. And then stopping and taking the pause. Anytime you're thinking about what your reaction should be, don't let your emotions overcome you. Just take the pause and either think about it then or come back to it later. Figure out your motivation. What are you passionate about? What are things that'll make you feel positive? How can you get rid of that negative self-talk, right? How can you be an optimist? And it's not being a phony. It's just looking at the positive rather than focusing on the negative. Being more empathetic is, you know, learning to be more judgmental. And, interesting enough, I've read this thing about the perspective gap, and that says that, when we're experiencing something psychologically, we underestimate how much will affect us. So if you can put yourself in others' shoes and strive to think about how they're feeling and calling up the emotions that you might have felt in a similar circumstance, you will be in a better position to really understand where they're coming from. And last but not least, social skills. Be a better listener by doing active listening, that is paraphrasing and repeating for clarity, paying attention to the nonverbal communication. And in order to be persuasive, you got to look for the with them. And when I say the with them, what's in it for me? Not what's in it for you, what's in it for them, and try to address that in whatever solution you're trying to come up with by using whatever their concerns are in your solution. Okay, so wrapping up, we've talked about a lot of this. It's those 4 boxes. It's self-awareness, it's self-management, it's social awareness and relationship management. Call it what you want. I like self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill, but call it whatever you want. You see what the basic pieces of this are. You do well to really try to enhance these skills in yourself to be a better person. Frankly, it'll help you in your family life and to be a better person at work as well. I've listed here some tests. There are some free tests that are available online just to kind of see where you are. I put some articles here that you can find pretty easily, including some links. And, if you really want to read about this more, there are several books out there that I've read that are terrific that will, give you much more insight into this. So putting the pieces of this puzzle together, last but not least, look, if you can demonstrate self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills, you will be in a position to be more successful, get positive results, know yourself, manage your emotions, understand your emotions, your motivations in others, be much more sensitive and empathetic to others, be a much better manager of conflict, be much more flexible in your interactions, develop solid relationships, be much more persuasive and influential, and be a much better situational leader. So last but not least, a little commercial about me. These are some things that I do. And, if you want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to talk to you further about this. So Daniela, that's it. I think I left 10 minutes open as I promised. So any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer.
All right, so we have just one comment that came in, and just for people that were interested, I know that you put the Coleman article, the link to the Coleman article in the resource page, but I also put it in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and just put that back in the chat box again for folks so they have quick access to it. And if people have any other questions, please use this time to type them into the chat box now. So in relation to the slide that you had on high performers and people with a high EQ earning more than their counterparts, there was a comment about maybe schools as well as parents should be doing some work in this area with kids so that they enter the workforce with higher EQ, which I thought was a really interesting comment. And then I wondered
Yeah,
if you
it's
had anything to say about that.
yeah. The group I was working with yesterday has schools for both staff and developmentally disabled kids, and there was some discussion about how important it would be not only, and this was a management group that I was addressing, how important it would be to not only give the training to managers, but give it to staff, and then introduce it to the kids as well, so they can manage it better. Actually, there's an interesting video on YouTube of Daniel Goleman himself talking about emotional intelligence. And one of the things he does talk about is how important it is to introduce this to school age kids, the concept, because then they tend to be able to better manage their emotions, and therefore it clears the way to be able to have them learn better. So that's a great point.
Awesome. Another question just popped up in the chat box. If you have any articles or information on, excuse me, on dealing with difficult people, is there something that you could share with us? Although I'm sure there's quite a lot out there.
Yeah, well, number one, I do a lot of workshops on that, so maybe that's the next one that we do. But you know, there are my go-to place for finding information on how to do things better in business is HBR.org, HarvardBusinessReview.org. If you go to their site, they give you 3 free articles. After that, you have to pay for it. But here's a little hint: if you use different um, email addresses, each one will give you three free articles per month. Um, you can just type in working with difficult people there. You'll find it. Go on the web, type in working with difficult people. There are specific blogs for dealing with that. There's all kinds of YouTube videos dealing with that. Um, when I do my I pulled together a workplace burnout full day seminar with a psychologist friend of mine. We have a whole section on working with difficult people, and they are difficult, but people with high EQ tend to be able to better work with difficult people because you're not reacting, you're looking at what they are, you're having kind of an advanced green light, so you know how to deal with them when those difficulties come up. And there's lots of different techniques that you can use.
I imagine, we have a large group of, not a large, but we have a very varied audience, right? So we have some providers that work with children, some that work with adults, older adults, runs the whole gamut. I imagine introducing this to children might be a little bit more difficult, perhaps because of the whole like technology thing that happens. That's different, I should say, for children versus adults. And I wonder if you could like say something around that and how we would address this with children or younger folks in general.
Right. Well, the nice thing about children, different than adult learners, are children can learn things that are presented to them in a sort of an academic way, and they absorb that. They're not quite as much learning by doing. But if you can, put together some kind of technology, or presenting this in a technological way, in other words, having a combination of videos, having ways that they can learn about this. There is information out there on EQ in children. You can probably Google it and find it. Any of you that have taken DBT training know that there's, a lot of what I've talked about is, there are lots of elements of emotional intelligence in DBT, and using DBT with especially with teenagers. So while I can't specifically comment on it, I would point you to DBT training as well as some information out there on the web that specifically addresses DBT skills and how to teach them to younger people.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry,
Anything
I thought
else?
I didn't realize I was muted. Another Zoom thing that we've heard
Okay.
20 million times this year, right? Another last comment someone said was putting this training into a game format for younger people might be effective. That's a cool idea, definitely. All right, so we are pretty much out of time for today. Lots of comments in the chat box about how wonderful today's presentation was. So I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of our participants today. And of course, thank you to you, Glenn. Just real quick, yes, the slides and the presentation will be available on the NIAPRS website. And please do return that evaluation that you'll be receiving if you would like to receive continuing education credits. So we hope to see you all at another NIAPRS event soon, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.